Hello and welcome to the Communicative Leader, hosted by me, Dr. Leah OH. My friends call me Dr. O. I'm a professor of communication and a leadership communication expert. On the Communicative Leader, we're working to make your work life what you want it to be.
Kevin, thank you for being here today on the Communicative Leader. I'm really excited for our conversation. And I know that you have scaled companies to 42 million. You've led thousands of professionals. And you often say the future belongs to leaders who can hold ambition and presence. And in a culture that typically rewards always on the grind, this hustle culture, what was a turning point for you in your own career when you realized that your growth was being traded for connection?
I think the major wake up moment for me was when we actually sold the company that I had co-founded. To go back a little bit, I founded a company after college in my garage with my best friend from the university that we went to. And we spent about 13 years. It was a consulting firm, very focused on like marketing technology, digital solutions for large enterprise brands. And we spent 13 years building this company, and it was quite the roller coaster, a lot of ups and downs and a lot of twists and turns. But at the end, we managed to scale the company to, like you said, about 42 million in revenue. We had about 250 employees. We had a fantastic exit of about 9 figures. And when we sold the company, I was really expecting this to be like a life-changing moment of just elation and joy and happiness. And it just didn't really land like that for me. It just kind of felt like another Monday. And afterwards I was like, that didn't work out how I thought it was going to work out. Like
Yeah.
there's supposed to be something meaningful here, and there wasn't. And it really forced me to take some time to do some introspection and understand like why was I so disconnected from the emotions that I thought I was going to feel here. So that was a big wake up call for me, and I knew that I kind of needed to dive in deeper and do a little bit of inner work on myself at that point.
Yeah. Well, good for you. I work with undergrads, and it's amazing to think of you being able to do this with your best friend right after undergrad. And you're right. Thanks for sharing that moment, because you're right. You would think it would be one way. And then good on you also for doing that internal work, because a lot of folks, I think, would be like, okay, different than I thought. What's next?
Yeah, yeah. So I recently spoke at Cal Poly, the university I went to, and I kind of got to share my story with the college students that were there, and it was really fun, just kind of going down memory lane,
Yeah.
being in a business classroom that I was in 20 years ago, and they really heard the story, and I had a lot of conversations afterwards, and they were like, thank you for sharing this early, because I want to be successful in my career, but I want to be fulfilled. I'm a big like Tony Robbins guy, and he talks about like the ultimate failure is like a big success in your career, but not being fulfilled in your life. And so I, was able to share this with them, and I'm hoping that they can take that lesson out into the world with them.
Mm-hmm. And let's continue at that. So, leading under pressure, this idea. So I know you've navigated really high stakes environments where verbal clarity, emotional intelligence, not just soft skills, they're survival tools, right? And so I'm wondering, Kevin, in your experience, how does your ability, a leader's ability to self-regulate their own nervous system kind of change negotiations or difficult organizational happenings like restructuring?
So it's something that I didn't really think about until after the fact. And I think it's a topic that's being more broadly discussed today more than it was when I was kind of earlier in my career. Emotional like regulation was something that maybe you just found in a psychology book or something. But as I've started to look at kind of parenting and the parallels between parenting and being an executive leader, I've really kind of seen how the central nervous system, like polyvagal theory, just being able to regulate your nervous system is so important before any sort of exchange. Examples would be like, I would be in a meeting with a client and maybe something went wrong on the project. Sometimes clients get pretty frustrated and they can start screaming and yelling and like saying nasty things. And in that moment, it's so important to be regulated, because Otherwise, you're just going to continue to escalate. And your goal really is to allow them to vent, get that out. It should be civil, but sometimes it's not. But once they can kind of vent, let that out, if you can manage yourself, then you can get past it and you can work through a solution logically, because there's so much emotions that happen even in a professional setting. And so like those emotions need a space to land so that then your kind of logical brain can kick back in. And so a lot of my job was to, whether it was employees that were dealing with stress or clients for one way or another, being able to be steady in those conversations that were, fairly tense and difficult.
Yeah, and I think again in your response, you point to the importance of this introspection work so that when someone is having those big feelings, we're not triggered, right? We're not feeling, it's not hitting on any of those buttons that would, like you said, cause us to escalate rather than to sit there and hold space.
hmm Yeah, and you can just give yourself a moment to like understand, like when you can be the observer and kind of be outside of yourself in the moment and understand what's happening, you can really better understand like the dynamic between you and the other individual. I'm in the process of writing a book, which is a very cathartic experience.
Congrats. Yeah.
And thank you. It's actually about parenting. So it's the executive's guide to parenting. And in the book, I've worked on drawing a lot of parallels between leadership at work and leadership at home, and where you can use tools from your career to apply them to family and parenting. And so one of the tools I would often use, whether it's in a one-on-one or an employee review, would be like a skill versus will matrix. And this would be where I'd be looking at a team member who might be struggling in a certain area and understand, okay, is this a skill problem or is this a will problem? And depending on where that assessment lands, there's different protocols to help them or support them or maybe manage them out if they're just not a good fit. And then I started thinking about how similar that is to parenting. However, it's not skill versus will because you're talking about an underdeveloped brain and nervous system here. It's more about, are they regulated, to your point earlier, and are they connected? And so the X and Y axis change, and it's now assessing, okay, is this child regulated? If not, what's causing them to be dysregulated? And are they connected with me? Because if I've been gone for 12 hours at work and I just show up and I start commanding orders, like they're not connected, they're not going to listen. And so then it gives you a different kind of path of how to manage the situation. And all that only works if you can like take a moment, regulate yourself, and be that observer and kind of look at like the situation that's you're a part of, but is unfolding around you.
Yeah, and let's keep pulling on that thread because I know that you're a huge advocate of bringing these executive skills into the home, like psychological safety, for example. So, Kevin, I'm wondering, in your experience, what's the number one leadership habit that executives struggle to bring home? And maybe you can talk to us about that difficult pivot from control mindset at work to one that is connection first at home.
Thank you for asking that question. It's something that's very central to everything I've been kind of working on and talking about. I don't even know if it's like a skill, but maybe it's a skill. But the two things that I think are the most important really comes down to, and it sounds so simple, but it's so hard in practice, is just intentionality and presence. Because as an executive, whether it's your own company or you're a leader in, a corporate organization, there is a lot of stress. There's a lot of pressure. I would say that stress and pressure today is so much more significant than it was even when I was earlier in my career. The headlines about AI and layoffs and, the expectations of people to be able to produce 10 times more today than they could just a couple years ago. Like, there's a lot there. And so when you leave the office, or maybe your office is in your house and you walk out one door and into your living room, it's really hard to not bring all of that stress and pressure into your personal life, into your family. And that's not really fair to them. And so I think the reality is we're all working a lot. We're not in a world where 9 to 5 is a reality for most ambitious professionals. And so what's left is maybe a few hours a day with your kids, if you're lucky. So the most important thing is really being intentional about that time And it's at least taking some time to think about, how am I going to spend these few hours with my kids in a way that's developing connection, sharing values, teaching them skills that I want them to learn, and
Mhm.
just making it like a meaningful time together. And the only way to make time meaningful is to be fully present.
Mhm.
Says for years when I was a single father for a couple years before I sold my
Mhm.
company, and I had two young children, and I was, leading a growing organization, and then I was trying to figure out how to be dad
Yeah.
and mom at the
Mhm.
same time. And so I did a lot of multitasking and I wasn't very present. And it's something that I, really learned from, but I wish I would have done differently, because I'd go through a bedtime routine, I'd read bedtime stories, and I'd just be on autopilot. I'd
Mhm.
be reading the words, but my mind would be elsewhere. I'd be thinking about sales targets, I'd be thinking about leadership meetings, and I was just never like there in those moments. And it cost me a lot. I really noticed the
Mhm.
disconnect with my oldest son at the time, who was only
Mhm.
3.5. Frankly, there's a lot of things that like I just don't really remember very well because I wasn't
Mhm.
present. And, I missed a lot of things that I wish I wouldn't have missed. And so somebody asked me recently, would I have done anything differently? Yes and no. I think no, I wouldn't have worked any less hard. I think
Mhm.
like it's it's something I was passionate about. It set my family up financially for, our future. And so I'm glad and I'm proud of how hard I
Mhm.
worked for my career. But at the same time, I did have time with my kids, and I wish I would have been more intentional and present with that time.
Mhm. Yeah, and what a powerful example for them that you're talking about this, that you're open about it. You're modeling that psychological safety and lessons learned and integrating them in meaningful ways. Kudos to you,
Trying to,
Kevin. Yeah, yeah. Not easy. Hardest job there is.
yeah,
So let's keep thinking about kind of bringing in more of that emotional availability and thinking about it, especially when we walk through the front door at home, or like you said, if we leave our office that is at home. Because, at work, a lot of times we'll use calendar blocks or we'll have different types of kind of intentional ways for us to better transition in the workplace. But a lot of times we're not thinking about that at home. So how do what do you recommend? What are some tips so that we're not just physically present, we're also emotionally available?
I feel like you've done some research here because these are right up my alley. So the point I often make with friends, colleagues, just on my podcast, is that like you would never walk into a board meeting without doing a lot of preparation. Frankly, you wouldn't even walk into a one-on-one that happens every week and is fairly low stakes without some preparation. Yet we walk through our front door every day without like really thinking about what our time is going to look like, unless you have a bunch of like to do items that you got to take care of,
Mhm.
right? So your like time with your kids is the
Yep.
lowest priority, unfortunately. At least that's been my experience. And that's the experience that a lot of people have shared with me. And so, like you mentioned, my calendar for work is color coded, is blocked out for weeks in advance to the 30-minute.
Mhm.
And if I have something to do, it's not in a to-do list, it's on my calendar, and it's organized in a way that I know, is this like a strategic priority? Is this something that just like needs to get done now because it's a to-do item? So sometimes I'll use the like, is it a urgent and strategic? Is it not urgent? And just kind of organize how I prioritize my time.
Mhm.
But then for years, I would come home and there was none of that. And I would just like
Yep.
go into the weekend and we just default through it. And I'd be thinking about work the whole time. And we might not even end up doing anything that was really like all that special. And so
Mhm.
today I try to plan my personal life in the same way that I planned my career. And so I color code out the weekends and we have different activities that we do. And some of those activities are meant just to be close to each other and share space and be connected. So we might be like building Legos. I
Mhm.
literally have a calendar block on my weekends periodically to say like, okay, building Legos with my
Mhm.
son Liam.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's we're going to go on a hike, and I have a certain conversation that I want to talk to them about. It might be tied to like resilience or grit, because I know at this certain point they're going to want to turn around. And so I'm
Yep.
like building up this conversation. I'm like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
today we're going 10 minutes further.
Mm-hmm.
We're going 5
Yep.
minutes further. And so there's like lessons that I try to plan out in the
Mm-hmm.
time that we spend together. So whether it's like I'm communicating values,
Mm-hmm.
sharing my own experiences, I'm trying to teach them something, or just purely just trying to connect in their world. Like sometimes I got to let them
Mm-hmm.
talk about Minecraft or the
Yep.
new Super Mario Galaxy
Yep.
movie.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's part of like, it's not my favorite topic. I,
Mm-hmm.
I don't really care
Yep.
about Minecraft, but it's their world. And I want to allow
Yep.
them to let me into their world, so that then
Mm-hmm.
in return, they'll also feel comfortable coming into my world.
Yeah. Gosh, I love that. I mean, definitely goals, right? To think about that. And, it was making me think about sitcoms because it's always perfect, right? They're on this hike and then there's this beautiful exchange. And then you think, oh, well, my life doesn't happen that way. But when you're intentional and you can plan for it, right? That's a way where like, yes, I have talked to my kids about resilience, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when you have the forethought and
Yeah.
maybe some clever writers in the
Mm-hmm.
background, the scenes tend to work out pretty
Yeah.
well.
Right. Yep.
For real life is a little bit messier than that.
Yeah. And I love that kind of bringing like you said, intention into it. And
It's
so
funny you bring that
now,
up. Like
yeah. Oh, go
I, I've
ahead.
be- I've
Yeah.
been my son is 9, and he wants to watch shows with me, and so I brought up a TV show that I watched as a kid called Boy Meets World, and I let him watch a few
Yeah.
episodes, and it's
Mm-hmm.
so funny to watch because it was like, man,
Mm-hmm.
this is early 90s
Yep.
programming, and it's just really nostalgic for me, but he like loved it. He loved the 90s sitcoms,
Mm-hmm.
and there was just so much like family values baked in, and the
Yeah.
the situations the kids would get in trouble were so
Mm-hmm.
PG. And I'm like, man,
Yep.
those are the good old days.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And I think about I don't know if you've read any of Malcolm Gladwell's work, but a
Hmm.
lot of it most recently he's talking about how those sitcoms really bring us together and help to diminish like perceived differences. And you're right, it's a way where we can like social model. We can say like this is an ideal. This is us an idea to have a conversation. We can talk about these values and kind of a lot of times they're meant to be aspirational and you're sharing that with your family. Yeah, that's really neat. So let's think about connection before correction. And I know I have littles now too. And I know that's something that, kind of any parenting advice you get is before you have to correct, connect. But we don't do this at work, right? So a lot of times in these high performance environments, the instinct is to solve the problem or correct the behavior immediately. But I'm wondering, Kevin, in your experience in this writing that you're doing, how do you think if leaders were to adopt connection before correction philosophy, how that would improve communication? How would it help teams that are dysregulated or a project that's maybe not hitting its mark?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the word earlier, it creates psychological safety, right? And there's a body of research coming out about how important and how much psychological safety contributes to the overall success and growth of companies. When I was early, I was taught like I don't even remember, it may be called like the compliment sandwich or something, where it's like you give them a
Mhm.
compliment,
Yep.
and then you give them some critical feedback, and then you give
Mhm.
them another compliment. The problem with that is the feedback gets lost. I don't care how clear you are, if you give them a compliment and then you give them some difficult feedback and then you give them another compliment, just the way the brain works, there's probably some psychology that would explain it better than me, but like they'll walk away and not really grasp how the gravity of that critical feedback. I really subscribed, and I probably read the book Radical Candor like 5 times when I was leading my organization. And I think that I spent a lot of time with my kids like in this like kind of being executive dad and then like trying to figure out how to be more connective. And I think like if you translate that to the corporate environment, I think it means asking the same questions just in a different way. So like at home, I'll ask
Mhm.
my kids like, do you need a hug? Do you need me to hear you? Do you need me to help you? And there's probably a
Mhm.
version of that in a corporate environment where it says like, hey, do you need somebody to listen or do you need somebody to like help brainstorm? And either way, like I'm here for you and we'll solve this problem, but it is a problem that needs to be solved. Like there is
Mhm.
a concern here and we need to solve it.
Mhm.
Otherwise there's going to be repercussions. And thankfully when you're dealing with adults, like you've got more developed brains than, your tiny humans at home.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And so this next question kind of piggybacks off of that. And I'm wondering, in your work or your experience, I bet you've met with a skeptical leader or two who kind of says, what's the ROI on emotional intelligence, or, that long-term presence and intentionality rather than, looking at quarterly metrics. So how do you address that perception of a trade-off, that if we're prioritizing being there or emotionally intelligent, that it might negatively impact numbers or production?
Yeah. Yeah. So it kind of brings up an experience I had where I was in a conflict with one of my direct reports, and we both saw differently on a situation. And I wanted to implement a pretty substantial change to how our operations worked. And he felt like there was too much risk, it was going to cause too much friction. And being the senior person, I kind of bullied my way through it and said, like, this is what we're doing. I understand you feel differently, but like, this is what we're doing. And ultimately, we moved forward. We got this new system in place, but it was at the cost of, a relationship with a team member who I really relied on, respected, and needed their support. And I noticed the relationship changed pretty much from then on out, right? Like, there wasn't as much proactive leadership from this person or at least like support in my direction. And so, as a leader, you're really trying to balance like your beliefs and productivity against the costs of potentially, alienating somebody in your organization that need a strong relationship with.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think the key word there, is balance. It's recognizing that of course, there are going to be tough decisions, and we're not all going to agree. And that's part of what makes great teams great, when we have these differing opinions. But yeah, I think you're right. It's a balance in remembering that we're responsible for both tasks and relationships, and not
Hmm.
just one or the other.
Yeah, I think there's a tactful way to do it that, when I've reflected on this certain situation, like I don't think I was super tactful. I think I kind of like used the seniority hat and said, this is what we're doing. And instead, it probably could have been more respectful, understanding, and probably could have said it in a way that was like, hey, I understand your position and I really appreciate that. I want you to continue to challenge me in this situation. I need your support and we're going to disagree, but we're going to commit to move forward. And, like there probably could have been maybe I probably should have spent some time like regulating a bit before this
Mm-hmm.
conversation because it was a fairly like charged discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, hindsight's 2020, but that's the point
Yeah.
of all this to learn from our experience, share with others, and do it better next time.
Yeah. And so let's continue to talk about regulation. And you talk about co-regulation as a superpower, and about borrowing calm through co-regulation. So I'm wondering, Kevin, how can a leader use their own presence to de-escalate a heated meeting or a high stress crisis without appearing checked out or indifferent to these high stakes?
Mm. So a lot of what I talked about is just kind of the parallels, the ping pong between when family and leadership. And like the other day, we'll start with kind of the family side because my son was just having a major meltdown, and it was over just kind of the smallest thing. And in that situation, my natural like tendency that I have to manage is to just kind of command and be like, hey, this is what we're doing. Come on, we're going. It's time to go. And in that moment, I was able to kind of, like I said earlier, like be the observer, look at the situation and understand what's happening. And so instead of like continuing to bark orders, I surrendered and I sat down. He was dysregulated, right? And it didn't matter what I said or what I did because his brain was turned off. And so I just sat on the ground and I started mirroring breathing. And I just breathed. And finally, he came over, gave me a hug, like sat in my lap and started breathing with me. And at that point, after a couple minutes, like it was maybe a minute of just sitting there holding each other breathing, he was able to like logic again. And I could now bring him along in why we needed to go because we had a certain schedule. And if we didn't leave now, we were going to miss this, which would mean we would miss this. And so, with kids, like, especially as a business leader with like direct reports who's used to being able to say, this is what we're doing, and people just follow along. Like with kids, it was so much more of a learning curve to understand that like you can't like command, right? Parenting isn't about compliance, it's about connection. And in that moment, I was able to use connection and change the dynamic, change the situation, and change the outcome. Because ultimately, the outcome I was looking for was for us to like move forward in our schedule, but I didn't want to do it at the cost of our connection.
Yeah, yeah. And that, I think that's a really good way of showing the importance of, it seems, I think so many folks are really reactive in those moments and they think it'll be fine. I'm going to get you in this car any way that I can. And then we'll
throw
be
you
on
over
time,
my shoulder.
we'll be fine. Yeah, exactly. Right. We've all been there, but you recognize, or I think a lot of folks don't recognize the damage that can be done when we skip that connection and, what that communicates to the kids as well.
Yeah. You don't have a voice, right? The brain's offline.
Yep.
So it doesn't matter what you say.
Yep. Yep. I got a little one like that taking it, and there's just snot and tears, and I'm like, okay, let's both breathe. Kevin, so thinking about communication, this is one, when I was getting ready for our conversation, I know you've grown this organization to 200 plus people, later to 5,000. And I'm wondering, in your experience, how did you kind of ensure your core message and your values for that organization remained consistent without you feeling like you had to micromanage it or constant oversight on that messaging?
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time kind of thinking about like what were the things that either made me or made our company successful. And there's all the obvious like strategic things we did with our business, our commercial strategy and marketing. But like underneath all of that, one of the things that I think really allowed us to be successful was just proactive expectation setting. Like when you strip everything away, I realized we're just in the business of setting expectations. Like everything we do, everything we say, everything we sell is all, can I set an expectation before something happens? Because consulting is really tough. Like we're building complicated software and there's always stuff that happens that you can't predict. And so the more we could predict of what might go wrong and be able to set an expectation of like, hey, this is fairly common. This might go wrong. We might get rejected from the Apple store 2 hours before we're supposed to go live. Like, be prepared for this. And if this happens, here's our contingency plan. Here's this contingency plan. So, or with employees, hey, this proposal, we want to purposely send it out 24 hours before the deadline. And here's why. So, like, this is the expectation, not, bringing that idea to them 2 hours before like that 24-hour cutoff, right? So, whether it's with employees, whether it's with clients, whether it's with bosses or superiors, depending on where you're at in the organization, being able to like foresee what might happen and set expectations about that before it happens makes everything easier when shit does hit the fan.
Yeah. Yep. 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 You're like, we have an umbrella for that. We're ready for that one.
Yeah, exactly.
So, kind of continuing on that same note, I was thinking about the legacy of communication. And I know that, Kevin, in your work, you focus on building work and families that flourish. And I'm wondering, what are the kind of communication breadcrumbs that we can leave behind for the next generation of leaders, both in the companies you're investing in and at your own dinner table?
Hmm. Well, I think everything kind of goes back to communication at this point, right? It's not as much about being knowledgeable because, like, we have AI and we have computers and we have like the knowledge of the world's history at our fingertips. And so being able to like know everything isn't, I don't want to say isn't as important, but you're getting so much tooling and support that knowing the information maybe isn't as important about how you can communicate it. And what's I see happening is you can have these like junior or even manager level employees who can produce a insanely accurate 50-page report, but when it comes time to presenting that, they don't actually know the information. Like it didn't come from their brain. All they did was prompt engineer this dossier, and when they sent it off, it probably read and sounded amazing. But when it comes time to actually present those ideas, if they're not your ideas and you're trying to like say something that somebody else came up with,
Yeah.
it doesn't land. And you don't have the framing for, it to effectively achieve whatever outcome you're trying to achieve. So I would
Mm-hmm.
say that communication is going to become even more important in the way that the
Mm-hmm.
world, or at least the business world, is changing.
Yep. Love it. I couldn't agree more. So, right, I was like music to my ears. So, because it's kind of funny, when I was getting my PhD, I think some people are like, communication, like they felt a little bit underwhelmed. So they're like,
Yeah.
everyone talks. And I'm like, we talk, yes, but we don't necessarily communicate. So,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
love
there's
this.
so much to it. Yeah. Communication when I was in college was kind of
Mm-hmm.
like a degree that was kind of like, oh, the sports players will
Yes.
do
Yep.
communication because it's
Yep.
like easy,
Mm-hmm.
right? But
Yep.
no, I think it is going to continue to become
Mm-hmm.
increasingly important in today's society. I mean, you have kids today who don't even write their own text messages. They just chat GPT
Yeah.
text message back. And it's like, you have two chat GPTs texting back and forth and then two humans reading it. It's like, this isn't a conversation.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And frankly, like that
Exactly.
leads to so many problems. Like now there's all this research coming out that like, you know, a year ago, all the headlines were like, ChatGPT is the best therapist you can have, right? It's like the body of all
Mm-hmm.
therapy. Instead of working with one therapist, you got like the world's knowledge of therapy
Mm-hmm.
at your fingertips. And now it's like the exact opposite because it's like the algorithms are designed to connect with you. They're designed to keep you attached to this model. And so 70% of the time they're going to agree with you. And it becomes this whole
Yeah.
like South Park did an episode about it where it was like the sycophant
Yeah.
episode. And it's like, it's just constantly telling you what you want to know. And
Mm-hmm.
that I've seen like studies where they'll take the same exact argument from basically two people's lenses
Mm-hmm.
and they'll share my perspective, share your perspective, and
Mm-hmm.
the model will support each of them, even though it's the exact same scenario. It'll be like, you're right, you're right. Just
Right.
whoever the user is who they're going to support.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I don't know why I went off on that tangent, but it seems relevant to being able to like communicate your own ideas
Yeah.
and not just leveraging AI for your thinking.
Yeah. Right. And we've talked a lot about connection. And if we're thinking about relying on this artificial intelligence, like you say, to formulate our thoughts, our messaging, formal or informal, that's going to leave us in a really complicated, I just keep thinking of even more silos going forward if we're not mindful about communication and helping others learn how to communicate clearly and intentionally.
Yeah. We had situations where we would be, because we were a consulting firm, right? We would compete against other consulting firms for business. And I remember one situation where we essentially were pitching the same exact idea as another firm. And I found out about this much later because the client kind of like showed me. He was like, hey, look, here's your proposal. Here's their proposal. You guys presented. And it was basically the same thing. But he said it came down to how you framed it. It was more about the presence and the communication architecture of the story we were telling.
Yep. Communication for the win. I tell my
Yeah.
students all the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was probably
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because people, even if they can't name why, because sometimes we can't, they notice the difference. They feel the difference. Right? So 2 final questions for you, Kevin. And this is the way we end all episodes of the Communicative Leader. And the first part is, what is the advice, the tip, the challenge you want to leave with our titled leaders out there? And the second part is, what's the tip, challenge, or advice for employees across all ranks?
Yeah. I think my message that I'm really trying to communicate, whether it's in the book I'm writing, whether it's in my own podcast, really comes down to, being if you are an ambitious professional and you strive to grow in your career, I just really hope that you take a moment to think about what that looks like at the end of the road and what you want your legacy and personal and family life to look like alongside it. Because I've met too many wildly successful executives who do not have a relationship with their adult children, and that's really sad. And I hope, in whether it's hearing from me or anybody else, so like you take some time to think about how to create a life that's fulfilling across all aspects of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm going to thank you because I think so often we are so intentional about our professional lives. And like you said, the rest is a lot of times default or autopilot and thinking that's just how it's done. And I appreciate your helping us to remember the importance of being really intentional and mindful there and recognizing what we're modeling and the outcomes of that as well. So Kevin, thanks for your good work and sharing it with us today.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
All right, my friends, that wraps up our conversation today. Until next time, communicate with intention and lead with purpose. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again soon on the Communicative Leader.